So now we're going to shift to templates and the role they play, why they're important, and how I define templates. Once you have your policy, that really defines, of course, what comes into legal for help, what requests people submit, and that's the first part of our chevron here. Of course, if you have templates that you empower people to use on their own, then there is no request. And they go on about their business without having to come to legal, and then only come in to get legal's help when it's time to negotiate. Again, these are things that should be part of your policy when you're defining, are they coming to you to obtain a template? Are they coming to you for negotiations? And whatever other, again, parameters really are important to you and the role you want to play. So let's talk about templates for a minute. When does it really make sense to create a template? I've seen them completely overdeveloped and underutilized. I've seen a complete lack of templates. I've seen samples referred to as templates and everything in between. There is absolutely no one right answer to what should and shouldn't be a template. It has to make sense for your company, and it certainly has to be reflective of the volume of contracts and the time spent, combined with, of course, the time you're looking to save. So when really can you use a template? When should you use a template? We have to consider a couple of things. Do you really have leverage in order to push your own template? Will you be able to force your template on the other side? How long does it take to negotiate contracts? Are you taking such a long time negotiating because you are starting with documents or samples or other templates that maybe just aren't really reflective of the business? Or is it because you're getting third-party paper and their template isn't reflective of the business? Really consider, what's taking so long and why today? What are the industry standards? Who's putting out there, contracts that are being used that you've seen over and over again? Will it make sense for you to come up with your own? Should you just accept the other sides because that is the industry standard? That's the most common, depending on what side you're on, the buy side or the sell side, for example. And then what are the resources available? If you create templates, are they going to be still used only by the law department? Is the purpose for them to be used by the business? Are there different versions you can create where you'll be able to speed up business? These are a variety of things to consider because it doesn't always make sense to spend the time creating your template. Not every contract deserves to be a template or to have a template. But there are a few that I think we can all agree on make sense. I would say some things that are common to every company are, of course, non-disclosure agreements. I have seen lots and lots of varieties of them. I have seen some that are so completely overly complicated that they are a constant blocker. And frankly, it comes down to the law department just not being ready to let go and take some smart risks. Industry standards tell us that people are moving towards simpler NDAs. We see more and more of them cropping up, so to the extent you find yourself faced with an overly complex NDA, it's probably time to rethink how you approach NDAs and create your own template. That's a very common one. Now, once you have your own template, does that mean you have to do everything in your power to push that template? Maybe not. If you get a third-party one that's similar to yours, why spend the time negotiating over the starting point, right? The starting template, and just work from theirs if substantively it's fairly close to yours. Another example on the purchasing side. Every law department deals with procurement contracts whether they want to or not. Most law departments don't have dedicated attorneys. I was in one of the few that did have it because that was my job. The volume of contracts that we had when I was in-house was worth having, not just me, but I had a whole team of attorneys and paralegals and contract managers because of the volume of purchasing that Microsoft did given our industry, given how we operate. Well, it made sense, obviously, for us to have some templates because we also had leverage in the market. But every company is going to have some things that they buy over and over again. Consider whether or not you should have a simple services agreement that will work for you as a good default, especially when you're buying from a company that's either similarly situated in terms of size and leverage as you, or maybe one that's smaller than you. Maybe they would be happy to just have a template to work from. That's a really common place that I would start when you're considering templates, especially on the buy side. On the revenue side, of course, that is how you make your money, and everybody should have some form of template for their core revenue agreements, because that is your only way to maintain control for what you're selling. Leverage will still play a role, and depending on what it is that you are contracting for, you may not be able to use your own, but it's probably wise to have one just in case. It's probably healthy also as an exercise to understand your own positions and tolerances for risk. Once you create a template, you at least have a really solid sense of where you stand on the key concepts, and you can share that across the department and make sure that everybody's aligned philosophically. Now, one thing that's important to note about creating templates, and this is why I say be careful with picking how many you choose to have, especially if you're embarking on this kind of as a new effort and you haven't really had templates before in the department, or you have some that are very outdated and really need an overhaul. Creating templates, even one good template, is a project. It has a start, it has an end, it needs to be managed like a project. I'm not saying over-managed or over-engineered or overly complicated, but it needs to have some of that rigor that comes with good project management. And that's another whole course and one that I recommend. But you should consider, what are the stakeholders that need to be included in the terms of this template that you're working on. Perhaps not the NDA. That's probably one that legal will likely be able to do without much involvement from others, and others will be happy to not be dragged into that. But something like a purchasing agreement, a basic services agreement, it's important to bring in procurement if you have a procurement function at your company, or at least you want to bring in finance. Who are going to be the decision makers on some of these terms that are going to be in the contracts? Because as we know, and we'll get to this a little bit later, contracts are business documents at the end of the day. Yes, they're codified in a legally enforceable way, but their purpose is a business. So there have to be other people that are included in the process of creating a template. Templates also need to have a maintenance program. This might sound over-engineered and overcomplicated, but at its most basic form, you have to ask yourself, who owns this template? Who's going to maintain its current status, let's say? Who's going to maintain the terms in it? What happens when the next privacy regulation comes down and suddenly contracts have to be reviewed for compliance? Who's going to be the one that is accountable for that? Also, how often do you want to review your template? You can't just do it once and not revisit it again. It should be on some cadence. Do you want to take a look at it on an annual basis? Maybe that's too often, but again, somebody has to really think through some of these things and just keep it simple, but document it somewhere. That's, again, the benefits of treating it as a true project. Good project management comes with excellent documentation. And finally, consider where the template's going to live, who's going to be able to access them, and how. Is there a central repository? Is there an easy location? Who should have access to them in general? Do you want everybody to have access to them? Those are all things to consider, and to make sure that that is done in a secure way, in an easily accessible way. Is there a central location for them? Is the business aware of where that is? Those are all a little bit more tactical, but all parts of kind of the big picture when you're thinking about templates, because just creating them without creating an easy way for people to access them, of course, isn't very helpful. Now, if the purpose of your templates is to create access to something for the law department to use, and it really isn't about, handing them off to the business and empowering them, then obviously you just need to ask yourself, where do they live? And this is where technology will play a very important role. You want to have something central that people can access, and that's core to being able to share this kind of information. And knowledge management, information management is something that a lot of law departments still struggle with, but at a minimum usually have some sort of a shared location. So the work that needs to be done on templates, it's not an easy, quick project for sure, but another one where it's important to understand the scope. Which types of transactions are you trying to create templates for? Be specific, be finite, make sure you have a start and an end. Get input from as many people as you think are necessary, but not too many. It can become, a never-ending project if you don't hold people to timelines, meaning if you're seeking input, give them a deadline. If they don't respond to you within that deadline, well, they've had their chance and you get to move on. Otherwise, it will be never ending. Remember, templates should have a maintenance program, so people will have an opportunity to chime in again. You're also going to learn a lot once you start actually using the templates in real life negotiations. And once you start using them, you're going to very quickly see that some provisions just weren't as perfect as they seemed when you were creating the template from scratch. So you have an opportunity, of course, to go back and revise them as necessary. Nothing is set in stone. It's a fine balance between controlling yourself with the constantly tweaking the template, which some of us have that tendency, versus once and done, just keep starting with this template over and over, even though it's causing a lot of negotiation cycles, but you're trying to stay super firm by not modifying it. So find something that works for you, fits in your rhythm. Either way, templates are really good practice. And so if you don't have any, it is a great time to start.